And we're going to begin a new series this morning. This series I've called Decisions in Daniel, because as we read the book of Daniel, we see the characters making decisions. One of the best verses that probably everybody knows coming out of a New Testament book, the book of James, comes to us through chapter 2, and that is that faith, if it has no works, by itself is dead. Why is it that everybody hears that verse, faith without works is dead, and almost everybody immediately understands what it's talking about? That you can say whatever you want, but if you don't back up what you say, what good is it? I could say the words, I'm a vegetarian. I don't know why I would tell you that, but let's just say I would tell you that. I could say the words, I'm a vegetarian, but here at lunchtime, you're going to see that, wait a minute, you are not a vegetarian. And why is it that you would immediately recognize I'm not a vegetarian? Well, because of what I'm about to eat. And you would go, no, you're not. You're not a vegetarian. You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. Oh, come on, laugh. All of you were sitting there going, I know that quote, but if I laugh, everybody else is going, no, I've seen that movie too. But now here's the thing. Here's where it gets real, though. Can I confess to you that sometimes I walk around with a log sticking out of my eye, and I'm concerned about the speck that's in your eye? Why is that? Especially when I know what Jesus was saying. Why is it that I do that when I know that Jesus said that? And that yet still I walk around with this great big log sticking out of my eye, and I'm really worried about you, brother, because you got that little speck in your eye. And can I tell you that I know Jesus told us to love our enemies and to pray for our persecutors. But why is it that when I see my enemy or I see persecution, I don't right away go to love? I got it. Jesus knows my heart. And since Jesus knows my heart, regardless of what I do, He knows our faults and He knows our failings. It's going to be all right. Problem with that is, Jesus says in John chapter 14, if you love me, you'll obey my commandments. Well, Jesus, why you guys set the bar so high? Why you guys set the bar so high? We're beginning this new series in Daniel, and I call it again, Decisions in Daniel. And here's the thing. The thing about the book of Daniel is I do believe that we've got to take the whole book of Daniel, and I think it's key to understand Daniel is that the narratives that we have in the book of Daniel go right alongside the prophecies that everybody knows in the book of Daniel. In fact, the narratives and the prophecies are part and partial. It's not one or the other. The two of them go together in a way that if you want to understand the prophecies of Daniel, you've got to understand the narratives of Daniel. And so that's why we're going to be focusing here on these narratives. Some of them are usual Sunday school narratives. Most of you will probably be going over stories you already know. Perhaps you know them by heart. But I do think that we need to get into them, and I think we need to see the decisions that our characters make in the book of Daniel. So with that, let's begin in chapter 1. Now in chapter 1, Nebuchadnezzar has not yet destroyed Jerusalem. Not everybody has gone into captivity by this point. This was one of the early deportations. Nebuchadnezzar is getting tired of Judah, and he's getting tired of these rebellions, and he figures to himself, fine, I'm going to take some of you with me. I'm going to take them to Babylon, and that's going to set you all right. You all are going to stop these rebellions against me. If you know the story, you know that this doesn't work. There's going to be more, and eventually Nebuchadnezzar is just going to have it with them. But we're not to that stage yet. So Nebuchadnezzar has deported some. We'll pick it up in verse 4, and we'll go to verse 8. We'll pick it up in verse 3, and I think I made a mistake with this, so verses 3 through 8. The king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of the officials, to bring in some of the Israelites, including some of the royal family and the nobles. Verse 4, youth in whom there was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had the ability to serve the king's court. And he ordered them to be taught the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. That's another word for Babylonians. Or should I say Babylonians is another word for Chaldeans. Verse 5. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choicest food and the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated for 3 years, and at the end of which they would enter the king's personal service. Now among them were the sons of Judah, were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The commander of the officials assigned new names to them, and to Daniel he assigned the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Shadrach, and to Azariah, Abednego. Verse 8. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officers that he might not defile himself. Now, before we go any further, I want to pause on this, and I want to ask you, do you know what the phrase, don't rock the boat means? The phrase, don't rock the boat means, don't upset things. Don't do this. No. Okay, so now I want you to put yourself in Daniel and the others' shoes, and they've been kidnapped for all intents and purposes, and they've been brought to Babylon. And now here's the thing when it comes to you've been deported, you've been taken to Babylon. Here's the thing, these guys, they get a pretty cush gig when it comes to being kidnapped and taken to a foreign land. They get to be in state-sponsored re-education. They have the state teaching them the new language of the land they're going to be living in. They have state room and board. And you've got to admit, when you weigh out the goods and the bads, you don't have it that bad. You got this cush gig. You could be working in the kitchen. You could be mowing the lawn. You could be doing much, much, much worse jobs being captives. But you get to be in the king's service, and you get state-sponsored education to learn the language that you're now at. You don't have to pay for it. You don't have to get Rosetta Stone and try and figure out the language that you're now around. But here's the thing, Daniel says to himself, I don't want to be defiled by what is served at the lunch table. I don't want to eat the unclean things. Now, seeing how they're Babylonians and they don't have kosher laws, you can imagine that pork chops and hot dogs and camel are often served at the lunch table here. And they're also probably prepared by Gentiles. And seeing how it's the king's table, they were probably also offered to the gods before they were brought to the lunch table. And all of this causes this food to be unclean by the Jewish standard. And they have decided not to be defiled, but to obey God in this. Now, even the wine, you go, well, wait a minute, Jews drank wine. Why would the wine be defiling them? Well, by this point, you already have Solomon and Solomon's wisdom in the book of Proverbs and so forth. And Jews often drank wine diluted. Not the strong stuff that's going to get you really drunk really quickly, but diluted. However, there's no reason to think that the Babylonians are going to give them diluted wine, but going to give them strong wine. And Daniel even sees that and goes, this is not good. This is not good. Let's continue here. And I want you to see something that happens here. Verse 9, and we'll go to verse 16. Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I am afraid of the Lord my king, whom has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youth who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. In other words, he's going to execute me. Verse 11, but Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officers had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days and give us some vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearances be observed in your presence and the appearances of the youth who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. Verse 14, so he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. Now at the end of 10 days, their appearance seemed better and they were fatter than all of the youth who had been eating the king's choice food. So the overseer continued to withhold their choice food and their wine to drink and kept giving them vegetables. Now there's a few things that we've got to look at here, but one of the things I want you to see is Daniel and probably the other three have decided amongst themselves, let's not defile ourselves with the king's food. And here when they come up against this, they immediately run into a roadblock. And the commander says, no, this is a bad idea because the king has apportioned you to eat this food. And if you don't eat this food, then you're going to look like malnourished. You're going to look like I'm not feeding you. And then I'm going to get in trouble with the king and it's not going to end good. So the answer is no, Daniel. Now here's the thing. They tried. They put their best foot forward. And they ran into opposition. They ran into a no. And they could say, hey, I tried, man. God knows my heart. He knows I wanted to do this, but I just can't do it. And therefore, I'm going to give in now. But that's not what he does. He says, test us in this. And just in case you're wondering, you're thinking that these guys are eating pork chops and hot dogs, and these guys are eating broccoli and carrots. The thing is, the translation is right. Nobody go out of here and say the translation's wrong, or Ozzy said the translation's wrong. The word here is vegetables, but it means a little bit more in the Hebrew than just broccoli and carrots. The word means anything that grows. And so legumes and nuts and fruit and grains are also on this diet for them, okay? So it's not just a vegetarian thing. There's more to this. And did you notice that it says that they were fatter than the youth? And you go, well, that's not a compliment, is it? Why do I like to go to the gym and swim? Well, because I like cheeseburgers. And I like dessert. And it shows that I like cheeseburgers and I like dessert. And that's why I go to the gym, not because I like the gym. You understand?
Yes.
Now, you got to hear here, not fatter in the insult way or in our modern use. You've got to hear the old way that to be fat was a good thing. And all God's people said amen. But now notice this, because I love this. Verse 9, Daniel has set his heart, his mind, I'm going to obey God rather than men. And those of you who know the New Testament go, that sounds a lot like the book of Acts right there, huh? Because they committed themselves to God is working in invisible ways behind the scenes. Notice verse 9, it says, God granted favor and compassion in the sight of the commander. God is working in the heart of this pagan in ways I don't think the pagan even realizes God is working on him. And that's one of the cool things about God, is that He can work in these ways even when we don't detect, even when you don't see, or the people that you're praying for, even when they don't see, God could be working in their hearts. And that's what we see here. Now, I'm gonna not have a Bible quiz this morning, but I am gonna ask y'all, do you all know some of the other stories in Daniel? Do you already have some of the stories that come from the book of Daniel? And what happens? If I was to tell you that, see, they devoted themselves to God, and they said, nope, we're going to obey God rather than men. Does the rest of the book, does things just go easy for these guys? Do they just have a cush life for the rest of this book? Or do they face more problems? Do they face more obstacles? Life doesn't get easier for them because they choose to obey God. Life gets harder for them in some cases because they choose to obey God, right? Well, let's continue here, still in chapter 1 though. And we're going to finish chapter 1, verses 17 through 21. As for these four youth, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. Then at the end of the days which the king had specified for presenting them, the commander of the officials presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and out of them all not one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, or Azariah. So they entered the king's personal service. As for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in all his realm. And Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. So, God is with them, and God even blesses them. How many of you have ever tried to learn another language? Learning another language is not fun. It's hard. It takes time, it takes effort. Because here's the thing, you learn English, and English is a bit of a hodgepodge. You know, how many of you learned rules when you were learning English? And then how many of you realize some of those rules don't always apply? I before E, except when not I before E, right? But then you go to learn another language and you come to find out that we have sentence structure, that we like the sentence structured this way. But then you come to find out in other languages, they just throw those rules on out. You can have nouns and verbs and adjectives in any old order. And to them it makes sense, but to us we're going, wait, what? Do you think that it was any different back then? Do you think that these boys trying to learn the language of the Chaldeans in 3 years, do you think it's a good thing that God was on their side helping them in this endeavor? There you go. Now I was already hinting to, and I want to focus on it a little bit more, because you know that a fiery furnace is coming up. You know that a lion's den is coming up, right? And yet the text tells us that God is with them. Well, we might think to ourselves that if God is with them, then a fiery furnace and a lion's den isn't in the future, but you know it is. God being with them doesn't mean they don't face problems. God blessing them doesn't mean that they're not going to face other trials and issues. Can I tell you this story? And the story is a very odd story from my life, because here's the thing. During this point in my life, I am an atheist. I don't believe in God, and I don't believe in Jesus, and I don't believe any of these stories. And I have this coworker, And this coworker, he and I worked together often, and we often had to go for long trips in Montana. Now, I don't know about you, but in Montana, the towns are often hours away from each other. And you have to drive the whole distance. Can I get an amen? So we had many, many hours in the car to talk to each other and to share ideas and so forth. Now, he was a believer. Kind of. Now, I haven't seen the guy in more than 20 years, and I have no idea what he would tell you today as far as what he believes or anything like that. But he thought it was so weird that I didn't believe in God, that I didn't believe in any of it. And he believed in God, and he believed it, but I pointed this out to him, and he didn't seem to catch the irony. You believe, I don't believe, and yet we live the same lives. This guy even would help me to break the rules. This guy would even enable me to break the rules. We had the exact same morality, even though he believed and I didn't believe. Do you find that story sad? Do you find that story heartbreaking? That a believer and an unbeliever hold the same values? See the same things? Do the same things? Is there something wrong with this story? Daniel and his friends, not only are they blessed with God, not only are they blessed by God in these things, and yet they're going to face trials and issues, hard decisions, life or death decisions, because they're going to commit themselves to God. They're not going to take the easy way. They're not going to have the pan answer that just gets them around. And in my heart of hearts, God knows that I'm not really bowing to the statue. I'm just physically bowing to the statue. In my heart of heart, God knows what I really believe. So I'm just not going to pray to him during this time period so I don't get in trouble. But that's not the book of Daniel, is it? You know what happens. We were having a bit of this discussion in Sunday school this morning, that there is this teaching out there that just come to Jesus, and after you come to Jesus, everything is roses and caviar and candy. And you never have a flat tire. And you never get an unexpected bill. And everything always turns out just the way you want. And unfortunately, this teaching is out there. Somebody tell me I'm making it up and it's not true. Unfortunately, it is out there. You're right, it's not true, but it's out there, isn't it? And yet, I don't see how this teaching continues. Because how many of you have had a flat tire at the most inconvenient time after you came to Jesus? How many of you have had an unexpected bill at the most inconvenient time after you came to Jesus? So how does this teaching out? Well, I don't know. Anyway. But here's the thing. Just like Daniel and these three friends, you and I have to make decisions. We have to reconcile our faith with the real world and not the ideal world. Because you and I live in the real world. I want to invite the worship team to come on back up here. Now, I always pray that we have visitors. I always pray that we have somebody, and perhaps they're joining us online, and they don't yet know what it is to put their faith, to make this decision. And if that's you this morning and you're here or you're watching online, one of the things I want to encourage you to do is, although I'm not offering you the lottery, and although I'm not offering you roses and candy every day, I am telling you that the boys were right here to put their faith in God and to make the decision, I'm going to be with God no matter what I face. If that's you this morning and you haven't made that decision yet, don't leave here this morning without making that decision. You can come on down here. Or if you're watching online, you can call the church, you can email the church. The church exists to spread the gospel message. Christian, you're already in Christ. Here's the thing. Just like Daniel and the others, You are going to face moments. You are going to face times. If you have committed yourself to God and committed yourself to following Him, you're going to have to make decisions sometimes. Am I going to follow God when it's hard? Am I going to follow God when I face roadblocks and oppositions and when it doesn't go my way? Christian, I'm not promising you the easy route, but here's the thing. I'm promising you the right route. And you're going to see as we continue in this book that God is with His people. That doesn't mean you get a get out of jail free card. That means He's with you in jail. And you can take that to the bank. You can trust in Him. You can trust in Him when you're ordered to bow down to the statue. You can trust in Him when you're given the edict. Don't pray to anybody but me. And you can still